Hello and welcome to the big picture. The fourth summit of BRICS, the grouping of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, is being held in Delhi tomorrow. Today already the trade ministers are having a dialogue. What is this BRICS all about? How is it going to change anything in this world? They are calling this summit a BRICS partnership for global stability, security and prosperity. So, does this promise of providing global security and stability and prosperity, can it really happen? To discuss all this, I have here with me a very distinguished panel, Mr. Ronen, former Indian ambassador to US and Russia, former Foreign Secretary of India, Mr. Shashank, Srimathi Chakrobarthy, Director of the Chinese Studies at the Delhi University, and Mr. Mohan, a well-known analyst and also a journalist. Thank you all of you for joining me. First, let me go to Mr. Ronen. Mr. Sen, how important is this grouping, BRICS, for global stability and security?
Well, I know certainly it started off in terms of as an economic grouping primarily. And I remember, for instance, when it was BRIC and when it was not BRICS, with the addition of South Africa. And when I was in Washington, we used to have informal consultations among the ambassadors to the extent of which there could be some coordination of positions before the G20 meetings. And the first meeting of the G20 summit, as you know, was called by President Bush. And also prior to the IMF and bank and fund meetings, which were held. So it was in that perspective. In terms of the security and stability aspects, there was not much of discussion at that particular point of time, and there are differing perceptions, and I think of the different countries, and there are differences in their political systems also.
So, Mr. Shashank, is this summit aiming too high? Are they being over ambitious when they talk of providing global stability and security, and especially?
Well, it's really the second summit where South Africa would be participating. It was invited by China
last year
to join the BRIC grouping, which became BRICS. And so it changed its dimension purely from the economic angle. One of the growth engines, all the four countries were supposed to be the growth engines for the world economy, to a political security related grouping to involve Africa, which is an important continent which was missing in this kind of a dialogue. So therefore, now we are thinking more in terms of an ambitious agenda, and that has become also fallen over these countries as a responsibility, because the Western countries right now are going through a turmoil. The European Union has not been able to make a constitution. They do not know where they are going. Their heavy indebtedness of the PIGS countries. The Americans also, I think their institutions which are too big to fail have been allowed to continue with the way they've been doing. Therefore, now the burden of carrying the global stability, global agenda forward has fallen on these countries willy-nilly. And therefore, India will have to play a very important role as the host country to create new momentum for what the BRIC countries can do for the world economy, world's stability and prosperity.
Okay. So, Mr. Chakrabarthy, so you think that this ambitious agenda which they have, at least to some extent they will be able to fulfill? Will they be heard at all by the Western democracies, by the developed world?
Well, I suspect so, although there was an article in the New York Times probably yesterday where the author says that this is just some kind of a grouping which members of which don't really agree with each other on many things.
Exactly.
So that is exactly why I feel that the West is actually taking this grouping seriously, and of course all depends on what they come out with. Like it's true that on many issues these countries don't see eye to eye. For instance, India China's love-hate relationship is a factor, but at the same time this gives an opportunity to these countries to use the multilateral fora to improve their bilateral ties also, because I hear that after the event is over, after BRICS is over, President Hu Jintao is meeting Manmohan Singh to strengthen our bilateral ties. So, you know, it is definitely important.
So you think there's some promise in this?
Yeah,
Raja,
sure.
you know, do you agree with what Chakrobarthy said and some of the issues raised by Mr. Ronen saying, you know, there are too many differences, and this is what the Western media and Western countries are also trying to highlight. They seem to be a little rattled by this. Do you think they're rattled?
No, they're not rattled, not yet.
Not yet.
It depends on how much we actually do. So I think when you talked about the ambitious agenda, look, I think in all these multilateral meetings, there's a lot of hot air. I mean, you know, there is, you know, you have to speak in these grandiloquent terms. But what will always come out is really small incremental steps.
Right.
Now, if those
and
incremental steps...
This is the fourth summit in 4 years.
No, the thing is, look, I think what's important is also note that Ambassador Ronen will remember that this idea actually goes back, it was a Russian initiative to begin with. The RIC, what is called the Russia, India, China strategic triangle. I think you were the ambassador then when Mr. Primakov came to Delhi and talked about India, China, Russia getting together. And that football was played for quite some time.
Was it essentially a trade? I mean,
no, it was a political.
It was a political thing.
Russian conception was political.
Right.
And by 2002, we had the first meeting of the foreign ministers. Another 5 years later, we had the actual summit, and then Brazil was brought in.
2006, the foreign ministers met.
2002, and they start meeting every year.
Okay.
So it's in 2009 that actually Brazil was brought in. It became BRIC, and then the Chinese wanted South Africa in, so it became BRICS. Now, there are different agendas. I mean, look, I think the Russian agenda is more focused on the political because Russian are not a player in the economic thing in global level. So the Russian interest would be to focus on the Middle East, sovereignty, non-intervention, Syria. That is their thing, to get as much possible against the so-called Western position.
Right.
Now, the Chinese interest actually is economics. The Chinese are more interested in making money.
Right.
And if you see in the Sanya summit, the Chinese put across a proposal saying, why don't we trade in local currencies? Now, that's an important initiative. And initially, there seemed to have been some reluctance in Delhi. But now it looks like we are going along. And if India is going to borrow cheap money from China and buy the cheap equipment, it seems to make sense to begin to go down that route. And if that takes off, then I think it will make an impact on the international
Even politically, you think it will make an impact if they are able to, you know, economic cooperation increases, the political leverage also increases?
Sure, but you know, the thing is you have to demonstrate that you can do it, and doing things and saying things, there's always a gap.
Absolutely. Mr. Sen, coming back to you, there's this, what Mr. Raja was talking about also just now. Today we are talking of creating a development bank, you know, of these 5 countries. I think this also must be a Chinese idea?
No, India.
To develop it was originally, right. It was an Indian idea. This is a very, very interesting idea, you know, to take on something like the IMF and the World Bank, or at least have some parallel, you know, kind of a organization. How do you see this whole idea of a development bank developing? You know, we are actually, some of the people are expecting something to come out very concretely tomorrow in the summit on this.
Well, you know, on the currency, you know, in terms of payment mechanisms, that seems doable.
That any country, any of these 5 countries can use any of the 5 currencies to deal with each other.
Yes.
That's the idea.
That can, I think that can work out. And certainly I don't see any objections on our part. Certainly not. And I think it will benefit all of them. But I mean, if you go on to a development bank in terms of our jointly helping, you know, other developing countries.
Right. That's what China has been talking about.
That will mean a dovetailing of efforts. That will remain to be seen as to how effective that is. Because a lot of this, as far as the Chinese are concerned also and elsewhere, they are tied up with project assistance and all that. So we'll have to see to what extent it becomes a genuine development bank in terms of what we refer to as untied projects and all that, in terms of poverty alleviation and other health and other areas. But you know, coming back to what Professor Rajamohan was saying, if you look at other areas, like for instance, important aspects even on the economy, if you look at energy security, there are diverging interests. Like Russia is a major energy exporter, so it will be happy to see energy prices stabilize at as high a level as possible.
Exactly.
Whereas our interests and that of China will be somewhat different.
Bring the prices as much down as we can.
And stable and predictable also.
Right.
So even within this small grouping, there will be differences, but we'll, I think, try to see which are the areas of common interest which you can build on.
Mr. Shashank, can you just list out some of the common areas, common interests, which Mr. Sen also is talking about, among these 5 countries, which doesn't conflict in any serious manner?
Well, whatever be the background, Russians have been able to get over their heavy indebtedness because of the high oil and gas prices. China and India have become the major supplier of foreign exchange now. China, of course, the major one, but India also is being requested to contribute to the welfare of the European countries and elsewhere. Therefore, Brazil, of course, is the most important Latin American country. So in this regard, these countries are being requested to contribute more to the international financial institutions, but without acquiring a larger stake in the running of those institutions. So one formula which had been found out at the last G20 meeting was to allow the Asian countries to have their own mutual currency swap up to $120 billion. India has been out of it. Therefore, India would like to get involved into some kind of a setup whereby the international financial institutions, they work at one point, but at the same time, if the developing countries want money, that can be given out of another institution where these countries, the BRIC countries, can play a larger role. Not necessarily they will not get a bigger seat or bigger share in the World Bank or International IMF, which the developed world does not want to give immediately. That's why they're coming up with all kinds of new institutions, financial institutions, telling China and India to contribute money to those financial institutions rather than picking up assets in their countries.
Absolutely. We'll continue with this discussion. It's getting very interesting. We need to go into a short break now. Please keep watching. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. We are discussing the 4th BRICS summit, which is to be held in Delhi tomorrow. Raja, what Mr. Shashank also was talking about. But there are very interesting things happening where they are saying, Chinese are saying that this development bank is an Indian proposition. India wants to get funds because it's not able to get funds from outside, or it doesn't want to get from outside. So they are proposing, India is proposing this development bank so that it can get as much money as possible for its infrastructure projects and things like that. So already there is some kind of a differences on this.
No, I think everybody's calculating and everybody's monitoring what other person is calculating. So you're referring to the commentary in one of the Chinese press today, saying that look, it's an Indian idea. India is looking for capital to do various things. But the Chinese have made it quite clear. Look, when you're lending money, you're not going to be, just writing checks just for the heck of it. So that connects in some sense. Look how we run our own economy. Then becomes an issue. But the important thing, I think, what the BRICS are trying to do is, look, there is a global financial crisis. The existing institutions are shaky. A dollar has become unstable. And in that context, look, if you work together, you create some structures, some systems, then you secure your own interests. So, but this is going to be a long process.
One of the things which is being said is this increasing, on dollar, dependence on dollar and euros and things like that can be reduced if this arrangement, which the currency arrangement can also be worked out.
Yeah, that's what specifically. Look, if you don't, as China has become a major partner for India, for example. Like most of the power equipment you're importing from China.
Right.
Most of the telecom equipment now comes from China. So, and the Chinese banks are willing to lend money at cheaper rates than the rest of the world. And we've also seen Reserve Bank of India recently issued new guidelines saying Indian companies can raise ECBs, what are called external commercial borrowings, in yuan.
Right.
So I think we are moving towards acquiring greater flexibility. Look, if your economic partnership with China is deepening, then you're interested in seeing whether you can do a trade in common currencies. And for China, it also benefits because it increases the significance of the yuan. But that is just one second. That is different from the bank issue which Ambassador Sen and Mr. Shashank talked about. The bank is a more serious institution.
Right.
And you can't overnight create an alternative structure.
Yeah.
And whether, how far they can go. I mean, I think it is still in a very preliminary stage. And Latin America has a bank of its own, but that's not had big effect. So this is going to take a long time. But the important thing is at this point to talk to see how far you can go.
Mr. Chakrobarthy, so BRICS is, as of now, it's more of an economic grouping. Politically, do you see anything happening in this, at this, in the next 24 hours when they are meeting? Do you see any, decisions being taken which will have some political effect globally?
Well, globally or not, but there are signs that bilateral relations will probably be on a sounder footing. You see, when Hu Jintao came to India in 2006, it was not a very pleasant visit because just a couple of days before that, the Chinese ambassador made a statement about Arunachal Pradesh, which no one liked. And now he has come in a more, in an environment where things are a little more stable.
A little more conducive.
A little more conducive to peace. So it all depends on, what transpires at the meetings between him and Manmohan Singh and what happens subsequently. But I am hopeful that, such, as I said earlier, such multilateral interactions probably strengthen also bilateral ties, because it is generally believed that India and China, agree on most things, in multilateral fora. Some they may have bilateral differences.
Exactly. I mean, in fact, I was coming to that, Mr. Sen. Two issues we are reading that I don't know. Raja will. I would like to bring in Raja later also on this. Syria and Iran. These are, on these two issues. There's supposed to be there going to be some discussions tomorrow. So you think there have been differences of opinion between India and China and on Syria? First India stayed neutral, then they voted. So now you see anything concrete happening on the issues of Syria and Iran in this summit?
I would say very fundamentally, like even on economic issues, we are talking about these issues, like they are not identical. I found, like for instance, even in G20, we couldn't coordinate our positions. On the on the bank fund meetings, we couldn't even have decide on a common candidate.
IMF common candidate.
So, there are wide differences. I don't want to go into those. But on political and security, there are even more. For instance, you had just had issues relating to proliferation and nuclear security.
Right.
Widely different practices also, because you have actually Pakistan, our neighbor, which is not only a proliferator, but it is also a recipient, in terms of from China,
right,
for instance. So where do you, in actual practice, there are lots of areas, for instance, on which what we actually do and what we say, you can't, you'll have to reconcile them somewhere. And on this issue and relating to as democracy and human rights, it will be very difficult for us to sustain it in terms of, maintaining a separate rhetoric, international forum, and do something else in the region. It will be very difficult to
Mr.
sustain.
Shashank, do you agree with what Mr. Sen is saying on this?
I broadly agree with what Mr. Sen is saying, because really it was supposed to be an economic grouping.
Right.
I mean, one origin is from
now
the
now they're talking of bringing in international terrorism, even weapons of mass destruction, all kinds of things are being discussed.
These are all because this is the Chinese concept to turn it into an economic political gathering. India was quite satisfied because the Goldman Sachs had come up with the report saying that this BRIC country, they will become the mover of the world economy over the next 20, 30 years. So we were quite satisfied with that kind of a formulation, and meet from time to time to see how things were going on in other parts of the world, and whether we could find, and India and China, because becoming part of the East Asia Summit, at least there was some kind of a common objective. And now Russia also has become a part of that. So therefore, one could move much more easily on the economic factors. Now for the political ones, to bring in the same agenda which you have in the UN, which you have in the various other international groupings, would be a complicated idea. But if we can achieve on terrorism the responsibility that Pakistan, Afghanistan region, which has been spewing out terrorism all over the place, can be contained somehow. China has so far been taking the view that Chinese interests should not be hurt, but if other countries' interests are hurt, then doesn't matter very much. They have to change their stand. They are now trying to invest much more in Afghanistan, so they have a stake in stability in Afghanistan and in making sure that Pakistan also does not get destabilized.
Right.
Therefore, terrorism is one issue. Nuclear, of course, their major responsibility is on North Korea side. But Iran also, we have to see that Iran abides by its commitments. And we have an old relationship. We would like to continue to build up relations with Iran, but keeping in mind that their international commitments are adhered to by the Iranian government.
So this, the commonalities, finding commonalities in this grouping is not going to be an easy task. And as far as coming back to this question of Syria and Iran, do you expect anything concrete to happen tomorrow on that?
I think, diplomats know how to bridge differences and find words. So you're going to generally express a sentiment on some things broadly, saying that, look, it should be Syrian-led, it should be Syrian-owned. It's possible to find formulations. I mean, they've done this for a lifetime, both of them. But that doesn't take away the differences that exist.
Exactly.
Yeah. For example, I mean, the kind of stakes Russia has in Syria are not the same that India has.
India has.
Now, India has bigger stakes in the Arab Gulf, so India is much more strongly linked to what the Arab League says.
Right.
Now, the Chinese, who actually went along with Russia on Syria, since then they've been very quickly trying to reposition themselves in a way that they don't get caught by merely tailing the Russians. So everyone is adapting. So within that framework, I mean, I'm sure you can find some formulations broadly. Iran, again, I think I think we can all say that, look, don't go for war, go for peaceful solution, that all the rhetoric that is coming from Israel is not a good one. So that's doable. And Afghanistan, I mean, I think there's a genuine shared interest. As the Americans withdraw, what is it that you can begin to talk about terrorism as an important common issue? But I think there's also related to this, much of the Western concern about BRICS as an anti-Western forum. Now, I think a lot of that is exaggerated because, look, all of these countries, BRICS, want a good relationship with the US.
With the US.
And if you sit in a gang, I mean, it's easier to get better terms. So, on each one looking for their own separate relationship
leverage with the US. That, Mr. Sen, is that how you would look at it? That all these people are trying to come together to find some extra leverage, and it is not actually creating some kind of a multipolar world in this.
No, I won't.
You can't go up to that.
No, I don't think so. I think that I think we'll, as has been pointed out just now, we can always find language. But our concerns. Let's say, I mean, there'll be a lot of shared concerns between India, China, and Russia on Afghanistan. But that is not necessarily the perspective which this forum, South Africa and Brazil, has a slightly different. But I brought in non-proliferation because both these countries, Brazil and South Africa, were capable of producing nuclear weapons. So they have also a particular something which they have given up. So we can always arrive at formulations, but let us see. I mean, we can always have that generalizations. But how much of you can have these bricks? You can put these bricks together, but how much of mortar will you have? That is the question.
How much of mortar will it have, Mr. Chakrobarthy? Last words to you. How much of mortar do you expect this BRICS to have?
Well, a lot has to do with the improvement of bilateral ties amongst these countries. So if that happens in the foreseeable future, then of course BRICS will
will have some meaning.
Yeah, BRICS will have more meaning.
More meaning.
So, but still, I would say that it's a very encouraging step that these countries have taken, and it represents almost the entire world, entire developing world plus Russia, and that is very important. So it should not appear to be a threat to any other country, but within itself, there is a lot of need for cooperation, coordination, And this is, an important step, therefore, towards
Okay,
that.
Mr. Shashank, last words to you. So, this, you think that it would be better off if this remains a good economic grouping, work out all the trade relations and things like that, instead of getting into this larger ambitious agenda?
Well, if the political leaders meet, they just cannot avoid not saying things about political agenda, because these are important issues affecting the well-being of these people, and they are listening. They want to listen to the advice coming from non-Western sources, because Westerners have discredited themselves by sending out mercenaries in many of these countries, especially after the Arab Spring started.
Right.
So, what I'm saying is that this is an important forum which has been created. Earlier, G8 used to shake hands with the other emerging market economies over one half day, breakfast session or some such thing. Now, at least it will be a little more serious discussion. And there will be alternative viewpoint which will be brought onto the table individually and collectively.
So, Raja, last words quickly. As an economic grouping, you see it having a good future, having a reasonable future?
Absolutely, because look, the 50% of the current growth in the global economy is being produced by the BRICS.
Right.
But at the same time, we must remember that, look, we are at a different levels. That China is ahead of everyone in the BRICS.
Right.
So when you talk about global economy, a lot of times it is China and the US, because the nature of their interdependence is so large. So on a lot of those issues, when real restructuring global economy, the China and America is going to have a bigger role. But for us, use this forum to expand economic cooperation, to see which way we can leverage BRICS to accelerate our own development.
Absolutely. Okay. That's all the time we have today. But it's very interesting. We had a very interesting panel, and with views with solid experience behind them. So it's BRICS is an interesting experiment. Hopefully, it will help India at least to have a better leverage in this world. We'll watch what will happen tomorrow in the summit and what will come out of it, as Mr. Ronen said, if there's going to be any mortar in it. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Ronen Sen, Mr. Shashank, Srimathi Chakrobarthy, and Raja Mohan. Thank you very much. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture.